Your photos are screaming, but you're not listening. What story are you looking to tell? And are you telling it? You're blind to your own edits. Let's face it, you go in to edit some photos, you probably spend hours trying to do it. You're moving sliders here, you're moving sliders there, but at the end of the day, you don't think your photos look any better. Matter of fact, you're looking at them going, what am I doing? I think my photos literally might be worse at this point. It's time to stop the guessing. And I think I might have the answer for you today. I think I might have the answer at how you can edit your photos and then how you can use another set of eyes to help you review what you've done and give you some feedback, some suggestions for what you can do to fix or improve the editing that you've done. Hey everyone, I'm Jeff from Magnolia Photography SC, and I'm a professional wildlife photographer located in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, if you're familiar with the channel, welcome back. And if you're new to the channel, well, welcome in. We're excited to have you here with us. Today, I want to share with you something that I've been using to look at my photo editing, evaluate my own photo editing. And I've been doing this research because I wanted to find something for those of you who are beginner to intermediate photo editors who are really just struggling with the editing process. And let's face it, many of you are. And many of you are struggling because you don't have a good workflow and process. You don't have a step-by-step editing process. And that is a very common thing for the newer photo editors, just not having a process in place. You just go in and you're guessing all over the place and you're not getting anywhere. You're spinning your wheels, you're treading water, and nothing is improving. I kind of stumbled upon ChatGPT and how to use it for my photo editing. And I wanted to share that with you in case you're not familiar with this. Now, what I did is I looked at a couple different resources. I looked at ChatGPT. I also looked at Google Gemini. And then I did some research looking for some other free options that can evaluate photos. And I came across another one called LeChat. Now, I did review other ones, but quite honestly, I wasn't impressed at all with the feedback that came with the photos. I thought it was pretty weak, right? I think the technology on some of these other free platforms, options, is just lacking at this point, something that needs to be developed and, refined into something better. ChatGPT is by far, in my opinion, the best resource for this, but I wanted to look for some other options because ChatGPT, if you don't have a subscription, you're going to be limited. You can only review 2 photos over the course of a 24-hour period if you don't have a subscription. So that's why I wanted to look at some other options. So maybe we'll take a look at all of those options today to see what they say when we put a photo in. We can kind of compare what each one gives us as far as feedback. And then maybe I can give you some tips as to how you can use these other programs if you don't want to do the ChatGPT subscription and you're planning on evaluating more than 2 photos over the course of 24 hours. So let's jump in to DxO, where we are going to do a real quick edit of a photo. We're going to export it, and then we're going to pop it into these 3 options, and we're going to use AI to give us some feedback on our photos. So let's jump in and get going. Okay, welcome into DxO Photolab 8. I am just going to, again, go through a very quick edit right now, just so you can see that I'm actually going through and doing this edit and that, it's from scratch. I haven't done anything beforehand. So we're just going to kind of go through this, work through this edit real quick. I'm going to apply the noise reduction, and then we're going to go to our white balance, and I'm just going to tweak this manually, and I'll start there. That looks pretty good. Go to the DxO Smart Lighting. I love this tool. This is such a great tool just to help get good lighting across the scene. And then maybe we'll bump up the exposure a little bit too, just a smidge, nothing big. And then I'll take a look at the DxO Clearview Plus. This is kind of a good tool if you have like atmospheric conditions going on, but I also like to use it very minimally, usually somewhere between like 0 and 10. If I just want to give a little extra punch to the sharpness. And then we'll take a look at our selective tones, which of course is going to deal with our highlights and our midtones and all of those things. And again, I'm not spending a ton of time on this edit. I just really want to get it to something really close to what I would do if I was doing this and really taking my time. Let's see here. I'm going to drop the contrast because I always like to drop the contrast a little bit and then add it in later on with a local adjustment, because I just like what it does to the background elements when I kind of use this technique. So that's what I'm doing right here. Then we're going to go down to the tone curve. We're going to put it on the luminance tab. And I'm going to bump up the whites here in the photo. And then I'm going to come down here and just pull down a little bit on the midtones just to give it a little extra contrast, give it a little bit of extra punch detail in those areas. And then I'm going to bump up our saturation and our vibrancy. And so we'll kind of leave that here. Let's see what we got going on here with the cyan. Will kind of control this bird a little bit. I kind of like that. Maybe just a little bit brighter. Just go +3 there. See if we got what we got going on here. Not much going on with the green channel. And this is the channel mixer in DxO. And this is kind of like, you kind of view this tool as like a filter on your photo, but it can do some different things that are kind of cool. And so I'm going to just reduce the yellows a little bit because it brings out a little bit of pop in those green grasses, because we tend to have a lot of yellows in those green grasses and leaves and those types of things. So I like that. Then I'm going to go quickly to my local adjustments, where I'm going to do a quick highlight here of my subject. And we're just going to get an auto mask on him. And the auto mask is what this does is this is a tool that's pretty effective, has edge detection in it. So we can just really paint over our subject, and we can reduce the opacity of our mask so that we can see what we have going on there. And then I'm just going to bump up the micro contrast here. I usually like to bring it up right around 50 or so, because it just adds in a little bit more detail to those feathers. If you recall, I reduced the contrast on the global adjustment because, again, I like what it does to the background elements. And then I like to add the micro contrast, but just to the bird, to bring back some of the details in those feathers. And I might bump up the exposure a little bit here too, just because I want the bird to be a little bit more bright in relation to the background. Because remember, ways that we can draw the viewer's attention to our subject, right? We have areas of brightness, color, and contrast. Those can really draw the viewer's eye. And that's what I'm looking to do here, is draw the viewer's eye. So that gives us some exposure and micro contrast. I'm going to also click on the adjustment brush, and I want to come in here to the eye of my bird. And I'm going to do both the pupil and iris here. So I'm just going to bump up maybe just a little bit on the exposure, very subtle. I'm going to keep that at like +8. And I might just come down here and add a little vibrancy to it as well. I'll put that at about +25. And then I'm going to add another mask and go back here to the black pupil, where we're just going to drop the exposure a little bit on this just to make it a little blacker and give those edges just a little bit more definition. And then I'm going to close out of local adjustments, and I'll close out of the mask. I'll hit Command 0, and that will bring us back out here to our bird. Great. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to export this out and to our disk. And while we wait for that to happen, we'll be back in 1 second, where we're going to pop this into Chat GPT, Google Gemini, and as well as LeChat. Okay, so our photo has exported now. And now we're going to go through these 3 different AI models to kind of see what they give us as far as feedback when it evaluates our edit. So I'm going to start with basically the programs that I would use if I wasn't using Chat GPT. Again, I do think Chat GPT provides the most comprehensive review of our photos, but I understand if you don't want to spend $20 a month to have essentially unlimited photo reviews, right? Again, you can only do 2 reviews every 24 hours with the free version of Chat GPT. but maybe $20 a month is something that you don't want to consider. Well, this is, again, a free version. This is called LeChat. And we're just going to take our photo and we're going to drop it into the chat box. And then we are going to say, please evaluate the photo editing of the attached image and provide recommendations. So that will be the prompt that I use. We'll go ahead and hit enter, and we will let it do its thing here, and it's thinking and evaluating, and here we go. So let me see what it says. So what we're looking at here is the image you provided appears to be a photograph of a bird, possibly a heron, and it is a tricolored heron, standing in a natural setting with water, reeds, and fallen logs. Here are some observations and recommendations. Observations: composition. Bird is well positioned in the frame with a natural background that complements the subject. Lighting seems natural with soft lighting illuminating the bird and the surroundings. Colors are natural and muted, which fits the serene and natural setting of the image. The bird is in focus while the background is slightly blurred, which helps in drawing attention to the subject. Recommended changes for editing: contrast and brightness. Slightly increase the contrast, which could help make the bird stand out more against the background. Adjusting the brightness can help bring out more detail in the shadows and highlights. Color enhancement. Enhancing the color slightly could make the image more vibrant. Be careful not to overdo it, as the natural tones are part of the image's charm. Sharpness. It's saying apply some slight sharpening to the bird, make the features a little bit more distinct. Cropping. Consider cropping the image to improve the composition further. You might want to crop the place more centrally or to remove any distracting elements at the edges. If noise is noticeable in the image, it's saying apply noise reduction. Take that for whatever it's worth. We already applied noise reduction. That's more so. It's not really saying that then there's noise in the image, just more so that if you notice any noise, you could do that. Vignette, adding a subtle vignette. I did not add my typical creative vignette to the photo, so I'm not surprised about that one. Selective editing, or otherwise known as local adjustments, right? You could use selective editing tools to enhance specific parts of the image. For instance, you might want to brighten the bird slightly, which of course we did. So according to LeChat, it's not brightened enough quite yet. And then background blur, if possible, maybe try to add some additional blur to the background. So that is LeChat, okay, just as a whole. So we'll keep that there for the results, but let's go to Google Gemini and we'll take the same photo and drop it in here, and we will do the same thing, right? Please evaluate the editing of this photo and provide recommendations. So we'll see what Google Gemini has to say about this. I think that we will see something pretty similar to LeChat, or at least that's what I've been experiencing in my testing phase of this, is that these two were not that far off from one another. So let's take a look at what this says. This says for Google Gemini: well-composed and vibrant photo. Here are some editing recommendations. Exposure seems good. Bird is well lit. No significant blown out highlights or crushed shadows. Colors are natural and appealing. The blues of the bird's feathers, the orange in its neck, and the greens of the foliage all look accurate and vivid without being oversaturated. Bird appears sharp and well detailed, especially the feathers and eyes. Good focus, perhaps some sharpening applied. Composition is well placed in the frame, slightly off center, which is often more dynamic than a dead center composition. Natural elements around it provide some context. The background is nicely blurred, which helps the bird stand out. This indicates a relatively wide aperture was likely used. Cropping and refinement: rule of thirds. While the current composition is good, you could consider a slight crop to more precisely align the bird with the rule of thirds if it's not already. Distracting elements: look closely for any small distracting elements in the foreground or background that could be cropped out or removed. Highlight shadow adjustment: subtle, deepen shadows slightly. While not crushed, you could experiment with very slight deepening of the shadows in the background, especially in the darker parts of the wood and foliage. Recover highlights, if any. And so that's just more of a suggestion, not really saying that that's an issue with the photo. Really, the photo has pretty even lighting. So we're really not dealing with anything like this, like both really evaluations have said, right? We don't have any real deep shadows or bright highlights where that's causing any kind of concern for us. Vignetting, right? The other one remarked on that. And like I said, I did not apply the creative vignetting to the photo like I normally do as part of my editing process, just for the sake of speed. And then color grading and white balance, optional and subtle. Again, we adjusted both of those things. It's just saying that we could basically revisit those. And it looks like it's saying that we could make the photo a bit more vibrant, which is also, by the way, what LeChat had basically told us too, right? So I tend to err probably a little bit on the other side where I don't want to overdo it. So that's something that we could consider doing. Now, one thing that I would recommend if you don't want to go the Chat GPT route because you don't want to pay the $20 a month and you want to use some of these other options, I would use Google Gemini in conjunction with LeChat. Yes, now you're doing 2 evaluations, but as you can see, it doesn't take very long. But I would kind of use both of them and then compare and contrast what they say. Just because they give you a recommendation, it doesn't mean that you need to do it. Right here, it's saying that we may want to consider adjusting our white balance, right? Well, we adjusted our white balance and I was pretty happy with where that came out. So we could look at it and we could say, all right, I see that that's your recommendation, but I'm not really thrilled with making any changes to it. I'm pretty happy with where it's at. You could do that, or you could try to, make the changes that they are giving you and see if you like the photo better. This is the whole point of this, right? This is our second set of eyes saying to us, well, this is where you have it, but this is what I think you should do. You can use this for what we're trying to use it for, right? This is our second set of eyes to give us some feedback on what we can do to improve our photo. I just want to stress, you don't have to do every single thing it says, right? Just because it wants us to increase the white balance or make a subtle change to our HSL sliders doesn't mean we have to. We may be very happy with where it's at. What I would look for, though, when we start talking about colors, especially because this is a big issue for a lot of photo editors, is if you start seeing words in these programs like highly saturated, right, or extremely vibrant, you might want to say, all right, maybe I need to revisit those colors. I'm seeing a lot of highly saturated comments. Maybe my colors are a little overdone. And so maybe you want to go back and just drop that down a little bit on the saturation to bring those colors down to something that might be a little bit more natural. So those are the things that I would be doing using LeChat or using the Google Gemini features. But let's take a look at Chat GPT, because again, I really like the detail that Chat GPT gives us when it comes to evaluating photos. And I just feel like it really does a better job. But I do think, from my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but again, my testing and what I've researched and seen, Chat GPT is a little bit more built to evaluate photos than some of these other programs right now. I don't know if maybe that's technology that is kind of a work in progress for them. I'm sure it is. But at any rate, let's see what Chat GPT has to say. We'll do the same thing. Please evaluate photo for the editing and provide recommendations. And so this is what Chat GPT says as it continues to work. Okay, so your image is visually strong, lovely and natural tones, great detail in the bird, and pleasing environment context. Here's a breakdown. What's working well? Sharpness and detail. Bird, well-focused, crisp detail in the feathers, nicely done. White balance, color, temperature appears natural. Whites on bird are clean and neutral, which is crucial for realism. Tonal range. There's a solid balance between shadows and highlights. You've preserved good detail in both the bird and the background. Color harmony. The earthy tones of the background complement the blue-gray plumage nicely. Very pleasing palette overall. All right, so here are the suggestions for improvement. Subject isolation and contrast. Recommendations: consider increasing the local contrast or applying selective clarity to the bird to help it stand out more from the background. So that's kind of interesting because all 3 programs have recommended maybe adding a little bit more contrast into the subject, right? Background distraction. The log behind the bird is interesting, but competes for attention. Apply a subtle graduated filter or soften the structure to the background to pull visual focus to the bird. Alternatively, darken the highlights in the log to reduce contrast in that area. Okay, so that's an interesting comment, right? And that's very different from what Gemini or LeChat recommended. Color accents, greens in the grass are a bit muted. Now, see, that's interesting because I kind of like the green color in the grass because I feel like if we don't edit it how we edited it, then it starts to become too bright and starts to cross over into that unnatural thing. So that would be one that I would probably personally take with a grain of salt, just because I kind of prefer the green grasses that we got out of the image already. Slightly boost the saturation or vibrancy of the greens for balance, but not too much. Keep it natural. So interestingly enough, right, Chat GPT just kind of reiterated what was kind of going through my head, right? I want to be very careful there because it did get, like I said, it got unnatural for my taste when we didn't kind of calm those colors down a little bit. Shadow noise in the background, there's a little tiny bit of fine grain in the darkest areas. Well, for me personally, those are small areas that we're not really going to see. I am not concerned about that. And I think we also need to remember too, when it comes to noise, that having a little bit of noise is not the worst thing in a photo, right? I think we've become kind of brainwashed or trained that noise in our photos has to be completely removed, right? We can't see an ounce of it. And that just isn't true. Grain can add a little bit of character to our photos as well. So I'm not going to stress out over that feedback when it comes to photo editing. Cropping and framing. The composition is strong, but cropping slightly from the left could bring more attention to the bird's eye line. A subtle vertical crop to bring the subject closer to the left third might enhance the visual balance. Okay, so that's interesting. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go back to DxO Photolab and maybe make a few tweaks based on the feedback that we got. And then what we'll do is we'll export this and we'll just throw it back into Chat GPT. We won't go through all three programs again, because just for the sake of the video, but let's just make a few tweaks here and see what happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more saturation to the photo. So I'm just going to bump this up a little bit. And I'm going to bring this up now from 40 to 60. And I'm just going to give it that little extra jolt. And then I'm going to go back to the local adjustments. And if we remember, we added a mask here, right, where we increase the exposure on the bird. I'm going to increase the exposure on the bird a little bit more. So we were at a little over 1. I'm going to go up to 1.80 now, just to make that a little bit brighter. Now, the other thing it said was to kind of darken down this log back here. So there's a lot of different ways we can do that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a subtle gradient here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of bring this in kind of like that. And then I'm just going to bring down the highlights through that log and maybe just the exposure a little bit, just to darken it a little bit. And I'll close that just to turn off that mask. And I think I'll leave that like that. Let's go back to our white balance. And do we want to warm this up or cool it down a little bit more? Yeah, I don't want to go too high there. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the white balance right around just a little over 8,200, just to give that photo a little bit more warmth. And then, you know what I'll do is I'll add my creative vignette on here, because that will also help to bring down some of the brightness on the background elements that was noticed. So I'm going to move my center point over my bird here so that my bird stays in the bright area. And I'm just going to bring this down to darken the edges of our frame. And I don't want to go too much. We want our vignette to be more subtle in nature, right? Something that's not obvious that there's a huge dark circle burning the edges of our frame, that just looks a little, overdone. Just looks a little unnatural. So we want to keep it a little bit subtle. And if we want to subtle it up just a little bit more, don't even know if that's a word, subtle it up, but whatever, we can make up our own words. I'm going to bring down the midtones just a little bit to the left, and that will just kind of push it out a little bit and just calm it down a little. So it'll be a little bit more subtle. So, okay, so that's what I would do based on the feedback that we have. So now I'll tell you what, should we look at a little bit more of another crop, right? Because that was another thing that we were kind of getting. And I really don't mind the crop at all. I actually really like the crop. We got the eyes on this line, which I'm comfortable with. And we don't always have to do that, right? Again, compositional rules are really guides, but we can break those rules from time to time, right? And we're not really doing anything major here to break the rule. We could bring this in a little bit and maybe get the bird a little bit more over here. I don't really like that personally. So I would rather have it a little bit bigger and maybe look like, something like this along this line. That works for me. And I'm just going to keep it pretty much there. So I'm going to export this now once again, and we're going to export this. It's going to ask us if we want to use a unique name, and we will, because we're exporting the same photo. And then I will minimize that so that we can see when it hits our desktop here. And then we will pop this back into Chat GPT to see what it has to say. Now, here you can kind of see what I'm talking about with Chat GPT, right? 2 photos every 24 hours is not a lot, right? We're on our second photo right now. And we've only been looking at 1 photo. So if you go out to do wildlife and you take a bunch of photos, you may want to go through this process. So it may behoove you to want to consider doing that $20 a month fee where you can get unlimited reviews of your images. And like I said, I don't know if you guys agree, but I certainly think that Chat GPT provides a little bit more of some comprehensive feedback and a little comprehensive more as far as the overall valuation of the photos. Okay, so photo has been updated. Please reevaluate. And we'll see what Chat GPT has to say. All right, what has improved? And then we're going to have some minor recommendations for final polish. All right. So subject isolation, the bird now pops more from the background, right? So that's what we did. We went in, we brightened the bird up a little bit more. We used a gradient there to darken down the logs. And we also applied our vignette, which also was going to darken some of those background elements that Chat GPT felt were a little too bright in our original photos. So excellent refinement according to Chat GPT. Color vibrance, the image is noticeably more vivid overall, particularly in the plumage. The reds around the eye and the blues and the feathers have more life without feeling cartoonish. All right, so we bumped up our saturation a little bit, right? We took it from a +40 to a +60. Now, quite honestly, to my eye, that felt a little uncomfortable to me. It wasn't the most, what I would call subtle increase. I feel like it might be getting to the point of being oversaturated for my taste and my preference. You may think that it looks great at +60. You may agree with me that it looks a little bit overdone. According to Chat GPT, it likes what we've done. The warmth added to the environment gives the photo a richer, more inviting tone, and we upped the white balance a little bit, right? We made it a little bit warmer. And, I think warmth of an image is always interesting. If you're looking to lean to one side or the other, whether it's a little bit cooler or a little bit warmer, you're always better off to go with a little bit warmer, because warmer images, studies have shown that people tend to gravitate to warmer images more than they do cooler. Now, that's one thing to consider, but of course, white balance, a lot of it is driven by the environment we're in, right? If we're in a winter scene with snow, we're not going to be looking to make our image warmer. Having something on the cooler side is going to support that environment much better. So we have to also be very cognizant of what's going on from that kind of standpoint. Mid-tone contrast, boost in clarity or micro contrast gives the bird and the foreground elements a stronger presence. This enhances texture without overdoing it. So that's what ChatGPT recognizes as what we did to improve the images. It's still saying, as far as minor recommendations for a final polish, we could do a little saturation control. The pine needles are bordering on oversaturation, right? So that's one thing that we did, right? So we kind of oversaturated those colors when we brought up the saturation. So what we could do, just as a teaching tool here, is we could bring this saturation down to plus 40 again, okay? And then we could go back into our local adjustments and go back to our auto mask. Now, let's use the saturation here to just bring up the saturation on our bird, right? That's something that we could do. We could add a little vibrancy too. And then that way we are not touching the green grass. We're not touching the pine needles. We're not touching the leaves. That would be a small edit that we could make to basically get it to where ChatGPT is recommending it for us. So that would be just another way that we could go about that. So I just wanted to show you that quickly. Background sharpness, there's a little bit of texture, competition still between the bird and the complex root log detail. Personally, I'm okay with that. I like where the bird is. I like how the habitat looks. I'm good with that. That's not going to be something that I change. Highlight clipping, the white feathers are approaching the edge of highlight clipping. So that is something yet again that when we're making these adjustments to the bird, if we just came back here and we go to the highlights, we could just bring the highlights down a little bit. Well, let's go back into the bird and we'll go back to the mask. The highlights are something we could just bring down a little bit on the bird, and that will help to kind of tone that down, right? So that would be how we could kind of take ChatGPT's recommendation and just make a little better edit. And then there's a color cast on the bird. There's still a slight warm contrast starting to show in the shadow areas of the bird's body. So we could go back here. We could just go back down to the temperature. Here, again, we'll click on the auto mask to get the bird. We can click on the bird and we can bring down the yellows a little bit, right? So if we go here, we're gonna bring that warm contrast in. If we go back, we'll cool it down a little bit. So we could do that. We could cool down the bird a little bit just to remove that yellow contrast, that color cast that ChatGPT was referring to. So here is how we go about this, right? This is how we use our global edits, right? Making changes to the entire image, and how we can use our local adjustments to fine tune our editing overall, right? We can really just focus on making a change to the bird, but leaving something different going on in the background and some of the foreground elements. All right, that is it for today's video. I hope you found this helpful. I think this is a great way for you newer photo editors who are struggling with, did I over edit this photo? Did I not do enough to it? This is gonna give you some real good feedback regardless of which one you're using, right? And give you some ideas as to what you can do. I think this is gonna help you, right? If you use this in conjunction with a nice step-by-step process, if you use DxO, go to my store, magnoliaphotographysc.com/store. I have a free guide in there to give you what you need to do to customize your workflow in DxO, right? I'll give you all the tools you need to use. I'm going to give you the order in which to use them. I'm going to give you that step-by-step process to promote consistency as well as help you succeed in editing. And using these AI tools is going to be a great way to teach your mind what to see, right? How to see the editing process. And you can see, yes, I moved through the edit pretty quickly, right? But it wasn't that far off from what I would normally do. We all can use a second eye to see our editing, right? It's just the way it goes. There's nothing wrong with that. Take a break, come back in an hour, revisit your edit, run it through ChatGPT, see what it gives you, and make whatever changes you want to make. Hey, don't forget, I just released also my full class. It's my DxO Photolab 8 Masterclass, in which I teach you all about the editing process here inside DxO. We cover everything you really need to know. So that is available at my store as well. So be sure to check that out. Thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate you guys spending time with me, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. If you want to check out some additional things on editing, check out this next video.